Many years ago, there lived a man named Richard, blessed with everything money could buy: cars, companies, and a beautiful home. But behind the grand gates and golden walls, he longed for something deeper: genuine love. One day, he made a quiet decision to give it all up, just to see who truly cared. What his wife did next would leave a scar on his heart. The rain fell gently on the rooftop of Richard's mansion as he stood by the large window, lost in deep thought. He was one of the richest men in the country, owner of many companies, luxury cars. But despite his immense wealth, Richard felt like a stranger in his own home. His wife, Grace, only smiled when there was money. His daughter Sophia spent her days posting expensive things online, while his son Daniel was always quiet, staying close to him. Richard could feel the emptiness. The laughter in their home didn't feel genuine. The love seems transactional. And deep inside, he felt a void that wealth couldn't fill. One evening, as they sat at the dining table, Richard watched his family eat. Grace didn't even look at him. Sophia was busy laughing at something on her phone. Only Daniel noticed him. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked with a genuine concern that touched Richard's heart. A small smile tugged at Richard's lips as he replied, "I'm fine, son." But inside, he was anything but fine. He was tired, tired of the fake smiles, tired of being treated like a wallet. He needed to know if his family truly loved him for who he was, or if they were just in it for the luxury. That night, as the household went to bed, Richard made a call to his personal assistant, Michael. "Michael," Richard's voice was firm, "I need you to transfer everything to the private account. Shut down the companies for now. Tell everyone I'm on a break. And most importantly, no one must know I'm still rich." Michael hesitated. "Sir, are you sure? This will shake the whole family." "That is the plan," Richard replied calmly. "I need to test them." The next morning, Richard gathered his family in the living room. Grace walked in, frowning, clearly displeased at being woken up so early. "What is this about?" she asked impatiently. Richard took a deep breath, the weight of what he was about to say sinking in. "I have bad news," he began. "I have lost everything. The business crashed. The banks have frozen our accounts. We have nothing left." Grace jumped to her feet, her face turning pale. "What do you mean, nothing? You are joking, right?" "I wish I were," Richard said sadly. "We have to leave this house today. I only have one place we can go now. My late father's small house in the village." Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. "Village? God forbid. Me in the village." Daniel, however, stood still, quietly observing his father. "Are you serious, Dad?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. Richard nodded. "Yes, it's the only way." Grace, enraged, yelled, "You useless man! How could you lose everything like that? What kind of man are you?" Richard remained silent. He turned around and began to walk away, his heart heavy with disappointment. Daniel followed him, his voice barely above a whisper, "Dad." As the family faced the reality of their new life, the mask of wealth had been stripped away. Richard's test had begun, but little did he know the answers he was about to receive would shatter him in ways he never imagined. The morning after Richard's shocking revelation, the atmosphere in the mansion was suffocating. Grace was pacing back and forth in the living room, her face flushed with frustration and anger. She had always prided herself on her lavish lifestyle, the designer clothes, the expensive jewelries, and the attention she received for being married to one of the wealthiest men in the country. The thought of losing it all was unbearable. Sophia, too, was in a state of panic. She had spent her life on social media, curating a perfect image of wealth and luxury, and now that image was crumbling before her eyes. She had never once wondered if she loved her father for anything other than his money. But now, with everything taken away, she found herself questioning everything. Meanwhile, Daniel sat quietly on the couch, his arms folded, watching his family unravel. He had always been the quiet one, the observer, but today he felt a burning need to speak up. He had never been enamored by money like his sister, and his relationship with his father had always felt more grounded, more real. Dad, what happens now? Daniel asked, his voice steady, though tingled with concern. Richard looked at his son, relieved by his calmness. We pack what we can and we head to the village. It won't be easy, but we'll make it through. Grace snapped, her voice sharp. The village. You expect me to live in that run-down shack with you? This is absurd, Richard. Do you know what this will do to my reputation? Sophia, still glued to her phone, shot a look of pure horror at her father. You can't be serious. I'm not going to live like that. What about my career? My followers? They will never take me seriously again. Richard stood up, his heart heavy, but his resolve unshaken. This is real, Grace. This is the truth. As for you, Sophia, maybe it's time to find out what is real in your life. No more luxury, no more online fame, just us, all of us. Grace was silent for a moment, her anger boiling over. Then she stormed towards the door. I'm leaving, she declared, her voice cold as ice. I'm not going to stay in this madhouse. I will figure it out myself. Maybe I will find a real man who can keep me in the life I deserve. With that, Grace left, slamming the door behind her. Richard stood still, the weight of the situation sinking in. He had hoped that maybe, just maybe, his wife would have shown a little concern, a little love for him, but instead, her true color were shining through. Sophia followed her mother, leaving the house with an almost rehearsed air of disdain. You don't deserve me, Dad, she muttered as she passed him, her eyes never meeting his. Daniel, however, stayed behind. He walked over to his father, his expression thoughtful. Dad, I don't know what is going on, but I think I want to say, I don't need all this stuff, I just need you. Richard's heart swelled with gratitude. Thank you, son, he said, pulling Daniel into a hug. It wasn't much, but it was enough. In that moment, Richard realized that even in the face of losing everything, there was someone or something more valuable, his son's love and loyalty. It has been 2 weeks since Richard's life turned upside down. The village was quiet, with only the rustling of trees and the chirping of birds breaking the silence. Richard and Daniel had settled into his late father's modest house. The simple life, with its peace and routine, was sharply different from the mansion they had once called home. But in some strange way, it felt right. Richard had spent his days fixing up the old house, tending to the small garden his father once cared for, and teaching Daniel how to live without the luxuries they had grown accustomed to. There was a sense of fulfillment in it, something that the chaos of city life could never provide. Daniel had quickly adjusted to the slower pace of life. He spent his afternoon helping Richard with the housework, and at night, they would sit together by the fire, sharing stories about the past. It wasn't easy, but it was real. It was a life that brought them closer together. But then, one chilly morning, the tranquility of their new life was shattered. Richard was in the garden, pruning the overgrown plants, when he heard the familiar hum of a car engine approaching. It wasn't long before the sleek, black vehicle rolled to a stop in front of the house. Richard's heart skipped a beat. He knew that car. It was Grace's. She stepped out, her high heels clicking against the dirty road as she walked towards him. Her once perfect hair was disheveled, and her designer clothes looked out of place in the dusty village, but there was something different in her eyes, a sense of urgency, of desperation. Richard, she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. I need to talk to you. Richard stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his worn out jeans. He hadn't expected this, not after the way she had stormed out of the mansion. What are you doing here, Grace? She took a deep breath, then sighed as if the weight of the world was on her shoulder. I, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I made a mistake, Richard. I I let my pride and my fear take over, and I treated you like you were just a means to an end. Richard was shocked. This wasn't the Grace he knew. This wasn't the woman who had stormed out of his life, accusing him of being useless. So what? You've come here to apologize? Grace nodded, her eyes filled with something Richard hadn't seen in a long time: vulnerability. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I've learned a hard lesson. Losing everything, seeing you and Daniel living without all the luxury, it made me realize that I have been living in a bumble that bobbed the moment our money disappeared. Richard Hart was conflicted. He didn't want to let her back into his life so easily, not after everything she had said. But something about her change of heart felt real. The woman standing before him now was different from the one who had left him behind. Grace, you can't just come back and expect everything to be the way it was. You have hurt me, and you have hurt Daniel. This isn't something you can just undo with an apology. I know, Grace said, her voice trembling, but I want to make things right. I want to prove that I love you, not your money. I want to be a family again, but this time with the right intentions. Richard stared at her, unsure of what to say. The woman he had married, the woman who had only cared about wealth and status, was standing before him, claiming to have changed. It was hard to believe, but in that moment he saw a glimmer of hope. Just as he was about to speak, Daniel appeared from behind the house, holding a rake. He stopped in his tracks when he saw Grace. His expression was unreadable, but the hurt in his eyes was evident. Dad, Daniel said quietly, walking up to Richard's side. Do you think it's real? Do you think mommy's really changed? Richard glanced at his son, then back at Grace. He didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. Could he trust her again? Could their family rebuild? Grace's eyes softened as she looked at Daniel. I'm sorry, Daniel. I have been selfish. I have let you down, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right. if you will let me. Daniel hesitated, his eyes flickering between his mother and father. I don't know if I can just forget everything, Mom, but maybe we can start over. Maybe, maybe we can start to be a family again. Richard watched his son, feeling a sense of pride mixed with sadness. This wasn't the life he had envisioned for his family, but maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The days following Grace's unexpected return were heavy with uncertainty. Richard, torn between his lingering love for her and the deep wound she had caused, found himself at a crossroads. His heart was conflicted, and the thoughts that kept him awake at night were centered around one question: can I truly forgive her? Grace, for her part, seemed sincere to her desire to rebuild her family. But Richard couldn't help but wonder if she was just trying to regain her place in a life of luxury, her life, now that the luxury had crumbled. Her action over the past few weeks had been a mix of vulnerability and desperation, but was that enough to heal the years of selfishness and pride? One afternoon, Richard and Daniel were sitting by the fire, sharing stories, when Grace quietly entered the house. She had been helping around the village, learning how to live without the comfort she had once taken for granted. Richard had noticed the change in her. She no longer wore her designer clothes, and her once perfect makeup was now replaced with a simpler, more natural look. But was it genuine? Or was she just playing a part in a new temporary role? Richard, Grace began, standing at the doorway, her voice shaky but steady. I need to talk to you. Alone. Richard exchanged a glance with Daniel, who nodded and walked out of the room, leaving the two of them in silence. Grace stood there, her hands clasped in front of her as she searched his face, as if trying to read his thoughts. Go ahead, Richard said quietly, his voice more neutral than he intended. Grace took a deep breath, then began. I know I can't undo everything I have done. I know I can't take back the hurt, the lies, and the years I spent using you for your wealth. But what I want now, what I truly want, is a chance to show you that I can be more than just a woman who wanted the luxury and the status. Richard didn't respond right away. The pain in his chest felt fresh, like the wound had never fully healed. And what makes this time different, Grace? You have had every chance to show me you love me for who I am, not for what I can give you. Tears welled up in Grace's eyes, and for the first time, Richard saw something that felt genuine. She wasn't playing a role. She was raw, and perhaps, for the first time, truly aware of the damage she has caused. I've been blind, Richard, she whispered, stepping closer. I thought the things, the money, the image, that those were what matters. But I have seen now how empty it all is. I have felt what it's like to lose everything, to not even have my pride or status to fall back on. And the only thing I want now is to make up for my mistakes. Richard stood there, his eyes searching hers. He could feel the sincerity in her words, but his heart was still bruised. How do you forgive someone who hurts you so deeply? Before he could respond, Daniel re entered the room. His presence was a quiet but powerful reminder of what truly mattered. Dad, Daniel said, his voice soft yet firm. I think mom really wants to try. I don't know if I can just forget the past, but I think we need to give her a chance. Not for her, but for us, for this family. Richard's heart swelled with pride at his son's maturity. Daniel had always been the quiet one, but today he spoke with the wisdom of someone who had seen enough of life to understand that healing wasn't always immediate, it was a process. Grace wiped her eyes, still standing before Richard. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry for all the years I was absent, for only caring about myself. I promise I will make it up to you, but if you will let me. Richard's chest tightened, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on him. Could he truly allow her back into their lives after all the lies and the hurts? He looked at Daniel, then at Grace. The choice was harder than he had ever imagined, but he knew this family was worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of a new chapter for all of them. I don't know if I can forget the past, Grace, Richard said, his voice steady but tangled with emotion. But I'm willing to try for Daniel, for us. Grace's eyes light up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. She reached out to him, her hands trembling slightly. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for giving me another chance. Daniel, seeing the shift, smiled softly. This doesn't mean everything is fixed overnight, but we can take it one step at a time. Richard nodded, pulling Grace into a hug. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. The days after Grace's return felt like a slow, cautious rebuilding of something fragile, something that could easily crumble if not handled with care. Richard, Daniel, and Grace were beginning to adapt to their new reality, one that was far removed from the wealth and comfort of their former life. Each day, they worked side by side to fix the small house, tending to the garden and learning how to live simple. But there was always the lingering question, can they really rebuild what was lost? Despite Grace's promise of change, Richard couldn't shake the doubt that clings to him. He wanted to believe in her, to believe that her words weren't just a temporary inflection of guilt, but his heart was still guided. Daniel had forgiven Grace, or at least tried to, but Richard knew that true healing would take time. Trust wasn't something that could be bought back with promises. It has to be earned. One evening, as they sat down to a humble meal of rice and vegetables, Richard glanced at Grace. She had been quieter lately, as the reality of their new life had finally hit her. There were no more extravagant dinners, no more shopping spree or trips to exotic places. The house was small, the work exhausting, but there was something about it that made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. Grace looked up from her plate, noticing the thoughtful look on Richard's face. What are you thinking? She asked softly. Richard sighed, setting his fork down. I don't know, Grace. I'm trying to figure out if this is real. You say you want to make it right, but I need to see more than just words. I need to see you truly change, not because you feel guilty, but because you want to. Grace nodded, her hands resting on the table. I understand, Richard. I really do. And I know it's not easy to believe me, especially after everything that happened. Just I'm here now, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I just need you to see that I'm trying. Daniel, who had been unusually quiet, put down his glass of water and spoke up. I think Mom really does care, Dad. I see her trying. Every day, she walks alongside us, doing things she never would have done before. Maybe we can give her time to prove herself. Richard turned to his son, a flicker of appreciation in his eyes. You are right, Daniel. We all need time, but time doesn't always mean things get better. Sometimes it just means we are avoiding the inevitable. Daniel shook his head, his voice firm. Not this time. I really believe we can make it work. If we try hard enough, we can heal. For a moment, the room was filled with the quiet hum of uncertainty. Richard wanted to believe his son, but the ghost of their past, of the betrayal, the lies, and the years of neglect kept resurfacing in his mind. Could he really let go of all of that? Could he embrace his second chance without being haunted by what Grace had done? The next morning, after breakfast, Grace took it upon herself to clean the garden. She worked tirelessly, pulling weeds and planting new flowers, her hands becoming dirty, shrinked and raw. Richard watched her from the window, a heavy feeling in his chest. Suddenly, the sound of a car engine interrupted his thoughts. Looking up, he saw a black SUV pull up outside the house. His heart skipped a beat. He didn't recognize the car, and the silk, polished appearance of the vehicle stood in stark contrast to the humble surroundings. Before he could make sense of it, the driver's side door opened, and out stepped a man in a sharp suit. Richard's heart sank as he saw the man's face, one that he knew all too well. It was Michael, his former personal assistant, the one who had helped orchestrate the financial loss Richard had staged to test his family. Grace, still kneeling in the garden, looked up at the unfamiliar car and then back at Richard. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice tense. Richard didn't respond immediately, his mind racing with confusion. What was Michael doing here? Had the game been planned too far? Was the truth about Richard's words finally coming to light? Michael walked towards the house, his steps measured, his face calm, but there was something unsettling about the way he approached. "Richard," he said when he reached the porch, his voice low, "I need to talk to you." Richard didn't invite him. Instead, he stood at the doorway, his gaze sharp. "What are you doing here, Michael?" Michael paused, glancing behind him at the simplest house before meeting Richard's eyes. "It's about the account, sir. There have been a mistake. We've been trying to contact you for days. Your account, everything hasn't been frozen. It's all still active. The transfer you requested, it never went through." Richard's heart pounded in his chest. What did that mean? Was everything we had done for nothing? Had the taste of his family loyalty been all a lie? Grace stood up, wiping her hands on her clothes, her face paling. "What does he mean, Richard? You are still—" Richard raised the hands to silence her, his mind racing. "Michael, explain yourself. What are you talking about?" Michael continued, his voice tight. "There's been a clinch, sir. Your accounts were never frozen. Your businesses are still intact, but you have been in the dark about it. You've been living without knowing the truth." Grace stared at Richard, the shock and confusion written on her face. "You lied to me? All of this? Everything we've been through was based on a lie?" Richard took a step back, feeling the weight of his own choices come crushing down on him. He hadn't expected things to unfold like this. He hadn't expected her to find out this way. And now the question loomed longer than ever. Can you rebuild a life based on lies? The weight of the truth hung heavily in the air. Each breath Richard took, feeling more suffocating than the last. Grace stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief, while Michael shifted uncomfortably at the doorstep. clearly unsure of how to proceed. I I didn't know, Richard finally whispered, his voice hoarse. He had intended to keep his secret, to test the loyalty of his family, but the reality of it all hit him like a thunderstorm. His actions had caused more harm than he had ever imagined. Grace shook her head, her expression a mixture of hurt and betrayal. So, all of this, everything we've been through, was based on a lie? Her voice waved as she took a step forward. Her hands clenched into fists. You lied to me, Richard, to all of us. Richard's heart ached as he looked at her, the woman he had once loved so deeply, now standing before him, her trust shattered. How could he explain what had driven him to make such a decision? How could he make her understand that, despite everything, he had only wanted to know if they loved him for who he was? I never meant for it to go this far, Richard said, his voice breaking. I thought I could test our family, see if someone cared for me beyond the money. I was tired, Grace, tired of being surrounded by people who only saw me as a wallet, not as a man. I wanted to know if you would stay, even if I had nothing left. Grace stepped back, her face pale as she proceeded his words. Is that how little you think of me? She said softly, her voice steady but hot. You really think I would only stay for the money? Richard opened his mouth to respond, but words failed him. He never truly considered how deeply his action would wound her, or how much it would damage the fragile thread of trust they had begun to rebuild. Michael, sensing the rising tension, spoke up. Richard, I think it's best we leave now. Let you both sort this out. Richard nodded, silently thanking his old assistant for the understanding. Michael turned and walked away, leaving the two of them standing in the doorway. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was deafening, thick with the weight of the lie and the consequences it had wrought. Grace finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Richard. What you've done, it cut deeper than anything else. Richard's heart dropped. He had feared this moment, feared the possibility that Grace might never look at him the same way again. He had wanted to rebuild, to fix everything that had been broken, but now he wouldn't if he had gone too far. I didn't want to hurt you, Grace, Richard said, his eyes pleading for understanding. I didn't want to tear us apart, but I have been drowning in doubt, and I didn't know how to fix it. The money, the power, it was never enough. It never made me feel like I mattered. I needed to know if you stayed because of me or because of what I could give you. Grace closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as she fought to keep her emotion in check. And now you know, don't you? You've lost everything in the process of testing us. But maybe that is what you needed to see all along. You never really saw us. Me, Daniel, even Sophia, for who we are. You only saw us as a part of your world of wealth and success. Thank you so much for watching my story. I truly appreciate your time and support. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It's really helped me keep creating more content like this. And don't go anywhere. Part 2 is coming soon. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. Stay tuned. Bye for now.